Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Michelle Holling-Brooks here from Unbridled Change, and you're listening to Soulful Practices Podcast. More beings are awakening to the call of their hearts and soul to live a life that is in alignment with their true self, launching themselves on a spiritual wellness journey for evolving their systems from being subconsciously survival-led to being consciously soul-led with all aspects of their life, with like true holistic health and wellness and being. That's the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. And yes, we want to be in alignment too within our careers, our financial life, social life, and family life, and in recreation too. While the spiritual journey of becoming aligned with our true self throughout all facets of our life is absolutely amazing, it can also feel overwhelming, lonely, isolated, and leaving us not really know where to go next on our path of awakening. This podcast is dedicated to helping you along that journey. I've been on my spiritual and wellness journey for over 25 years now and been doing this full-time as a soul companion, guide, and coach with my clients since I started Unbridled Change in 2008. And one of the main questions I'm always consistently asked is, hey, Michelle, what type of spiritual or healing and wellness practices will best support me on my journey of aligning to my true self? This podcast is the answer to that. Each week, I will share with you a new episode that brings you into the behind the scenes of my own personal soulful healing practices, and I invite you to join me in them. Each week, I'm going to be sharing with you a new soulful practice that is based off of what I like to call different pocket teachers. These are short mindful quotes, a spiritual key concept or healing concept, or a short text from a spiritual and growth teacher and wisdom teaching. And they are designed to help serve as a guide for us, a companion to us throughout that week, to help you courageously connect with the soul-led choices that will best help serve you in making the choices that will bring you into more balance so that you can live, love, and lead your authentic life. Truly going from having that desire, the intention to have a soul-led life, to embodying and unbridling your beautiful soul-led life. Again, I'm your host, Michelle Holling-Brooks, and I'm so glad you found us. Let's dive into the soulful practices for this week. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Soulful Practices, your pocket teachers for living a courageously connected life. And we're coming in this week with a new quote that I have to help build a soulful practice for you throughout this week. So this week I picked the quote by Ramana Maharshi, "Be as you are." And so Ramana was a Indian Hindu sage that was born in the late 19th century and died around 1950. His main teachings were centered around the concept of liberating ourselves from undue suffering that comes when we are stuck in that separation and over-identifying into the I as we identify ourselves with our labels. I am a mother, a daughter, a sister, a practitioner, a coach, a this, that, and the other. And when we get really attached to those labels and those ways of seeing ourselves and interacting with ourselves, it shifts us into more of a subject and an object of something that comes with a whole set of patterns, a whole set of rules, a whole set of ways of being, a whole set of all these archetypal different ways of being with ourselves that can really lock us into suffering, right? And so one of his main teaching was this process of self-inquiry and inviting those who chose to follow him, seeking that way to feel a sense of peace, a sense of joy, kindness, and happiness, and to cultivate more of that within their own life, that he really wanted to help them be able to find that and shift them from what he called object-based meditation. So when we're meditating on a mantra or a candle or our breath or something that we are making ourselves as the viewer, looking at something and bringing that in, that really is in the idea of like quieting and focusing our mind to an object and identifying more of ourselves as in relationship to that object. And what he wanted to invite us all into was this idea that When we do that, we're allowing ourselves to get more embedded into the different survival adaptations we have, the different programs that we have that over identify us, separate ourselves, and lock us into a way of being that might or might not be supportive for ourselves, right? Really creating a lot of suffering, a lot of dialogue, a lot of inner wars, outer wars around that idea of being attached to those beliefs and ways of being. And so while I am not designing to teach the pocket teachings that the different teachers of the quotes and sources of the quotes that I'm picking throughout this series, I did want to share a little bit about his quote teachings because it really does invite us into his quote of be as you are. Because within that quote itself, we might get stuck in the very thing that he is inviting his different students and followers into kind of freeing themselves from, which is when we say, this is who I am, and we plant that flag in the ground that says, I am this, I am that, and we keep putting sentences behind that, like I just did. I am a mother, I am a teacher, I am a, horse person, I am all these different things can really get me further away from maybe hearing the guidance of my soul or my heart, bringing me into a new awareness, shifting myself maybe from one of those identities or holding it that way and opening myself up to be more than that. I am this and I am that. I am also not these things, right? And releasing ourselves from some of these really toxic tapes that we have in our head that maybe came from a survival response or a trauma adaptation, an experience that we had, and locking ourselves into a version of ourselves that we needed at some point, but now maybe is suffocating us or locking us into like cement feet on the ground that we can't break ourselves free, hence creating a lot of suffering. So he liked to use the word self on purpose because, and I loved this teaching when I heard this from David Godman. I always can't say his last name correctly. And I was listening to him talk about Rama's teachings. Is one of the things that he really brought forward was that he shared that Rama used the term self on purpose to help us realize that self is not something that we go find, that we're trying to like transcend, go outside of ourselves, pull something in to us. That no, it was because self is always here, is always present, and always within us. It's just that we're so often cut off from it, from this ocean of experiences, trauma responses, protective mechanism, lenses, point of view in which we see the world through, point of view we're taught, conditioned to see the world through. That if we can release all of that, dissolve that, allow ourselves to kind of filter that out and identify it and then say, okay, how is that serving me? And then let it go. That's the process of self-inquiry that he's inviting us into and sharing with us is the key to really allowing ourselves to release ourselves from suffering, right? Oops, sorry, didn't mean to bump the camera right there, right? So when we over-identify with this be as you are, and that R is planted in a plant of this is who I am, and this is what my truth is, and this is what this is, and we're unmovable, and we're not then open to being able to hear the whispers of the soulful practices coming to us, maybe helping us to soften ourselves a little bit, to bring more self-compassion, to allow ourselves to have more flexibility, more mobility of the mind, allowing our heart to be able to come forward with who we truly be. Right? And if we just hop straight to, okay, I have no self, and we take that out and we just go, I am just nothingness, and I'm not identifying as anything, and I'm no longer attached to this label that is Michelle within this body that is housed in Michelle. When we slingshot ourselves straight to there and we release our conscious choice in all way, shape, form, or fashion, that's also a recipe for disaster and a recipe for real suffering within ourselves. So for those of you who don't know my story, I want to do just a little sidebar as to why I found his teachings something that really drew me in, and in the time frame that I found him in. And that was because when I was 13 years old, I was bit by a mosquito, and I ended up with having two viruses within me at the same time. One was spinal meningitis and equine encephalitis. And what happened with those two diseases happening at once was a very unhappy brain. One was swelling my brain out, the other one was swelling the lining of my brain in. And what had to go was the constructs of what the mind often brings us into. So when I awoke from a coma, I was in a coma for 7 days. And when I woke up as a 13-year-old, I woke up without any sense of self. A complete clean slate, everything wiped away. I was also deaf, I was blind, I was paralyzed from the middle of my back down. And because of all of the ability for me to interact with the world as a typical human does, was taken away from me in that process of that disease, I really was running in this complete unawareness that you are you, I am me, a table is a table. I had no labeling, I had no identification system, I had no allegiance to this thing called self. That it was all gone. There was no such thing as this Michelle to me. All I was running off of was the energy of what I could sense with my intuitive senses, right? And as a result of that, it wasn't bliss. It wasn't like, woo, euphoria. It was like an immense amount of confusion, pain, overwhelm, and suffering because I didn't have a way to sort or identify or choose what, who, what, when, where, and how. And so when I was running truly with this idea of I am you and you are me, and it felt that way because that is the truth in the big soul level, mystical level, I wasn't stepping into that place from grounded center, right? I wasn't stepping in from a place of choice to say, hey, I, Michelle, want to release myself from this real big conflict that's brewing inside of me, these big storylines, these illusions that I'm putting on top of this situation. And I want to filter this down to what is my soul? How is my soul asking me to show up? None of that was happening. I was just sheer running as a wide open, no sense of self individual. And it kind of stayed that way for about 2 years until my senses started to come back online, right? And as my senses started to come back online, so did my survival level of consciousness. So I was really stuck without a sense of self, just in sheer survival mode, being willing to be whoever I needed to be, shapeshift in to whoever was around me, because this idea of what Michelle wanted, who did Michelle want to be, how did she identify herself, that was all offline. And so I was like a vessel for hire of whoever was around me. That's what I became. I mimicked and I just mirrored and walked that way. And again, it wasn't peace, it wasn't tranquility, it wasn't joy, it was sheer survival and a lot of angst and a lot of suffering. So when I feel into this quote, be as you are, and the invitation of what I know his teachings are, which is self inquiry and allowing ourselves to release these illusions of how we identify ourselves, mixing that with my experience that I had early on, and then my journey of self to like find a self, find a way to plant a flag in something, and then soften myself through choice. I really am stepping into this one of what I learned to do on this journey of self, to be who I was, right? To be who I am, to be as you are. It really was about first excavating into that idea of who was I, because I was such a master shapeshifter. I was such a master at being anybody and everybody around me and just showing up the way they wanted to me, reading that situation, getting that intuitive hit and morphing myself. I didn't have a way to really honor the messaging that was coming from my heart and soul, because it was drowned out by this ocean of survival and personal tug of war conflicts, forcing me to show up in ways that didn't match who I truly was, didn't feel in alignment with my heart and my soul by any means, but yet felt like they were what I needed to do to survive, right? And so when I hear this quote and I think into it and I feel into it now where I'm at in my journey, it's really that process that allows me to pause, right? Allows me to step back and realize, okay, I'm not going to try to see this from that identified version of this is me versus that, right? And separation right off the bat. I'm going to ask for a higher perspective. I'm going to ask what else is here? How can I tend to this? What is wanting to come through to me in a way that allows me to realize that I'm getting stuck in an over identification of taking something personal, of writing the story to it. I'm getting stuck in a survival and a trauma adaptation of shape shifting or people pleasing or picking fights and being like they're me against them, top dog, one of us is going to win. Like all these different ways that I've run these very subtle shadow programs like little puppet masters in the background of me that really are creating inner divisions, creating inner undervaluing of one aspect of me over another. Wow, this is the one that has the most street creds. People want the healing practitioner. People want this. People want that. Will they also honor this other version of me, right? And so even the subtle negotiations with inside myself of how do I allow myself to show up in a space, who's like label like stepping in front of me, hey, this is Michelle teacher, this is Michelle, like what if I took all those off and I just step into that room and then I let my heart guide me of how to be in that room. Very different place than what happened to me when I was younger and in my early teens and into my 20s, which was a hot freaking mess, right? Of just truly trying to exchange whatever I could for acceptance, for belonging, for allowing myself to feel that connection in that point, right? And so, it's what they call trauma bonding. I was trauma bonding all over the place because I was just looking for a place to belong, right? That was a huge driver that was happening to me. And because of that belonging and that need to belong, I wasn't belonging to myself, right? I wasn't allowing myself to be who I was, to be as you are, right? And so I invite you just to pause right now and to feel into this for you, this beautiful teaching. Be as you are. And take a breath with it and feel into what is that invitation to be as you are. It brings forward a lot of questions, right? Like, well, what is that? Who would that be? Well, it depends on the situation. I mean, when I'm in front of this crew, I am this. And when I'm in front of this, and all of a sudden, maybe you can start to see this image of all these different hats that you wear or clothing, different costumes that you put on, right? Like, oh, when I'm around this crew, this is who I am. When I'm around this crew, this is who I am. This is one of those things that I started really noticing when I found this teaching. I was like, wow, I wear tons of different hats and they don't cross over. And each hat, when I really softened, had its own personality, had its own way of being, had its own mannerisms, language. I was shifting complete frequencies within me of who that was. And when I started to really feel into it, I realized sometimes I got lost. Sometimes in each of those different personas, in each of those different pockets of me, I couldn't find an essence that I would say who I was, that self that Ramana is asking us to find, right? Not that over identifying, planting that flag in the earth. Like we absolutely have to do that. That is a natural part of our progression to go from survival level, belonging, driving to for acceptance and protection to saying this is some core things about me, and then making the choice to say, okay, now I'm going to follow my heart so that I can show up in a way that honors me and honors the other, brings me into courageous, compassionate actions that match what is the highest good and benefit of all. Taking myself from having inner dis-ease and war happening within me, suffering, 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 and moving myself into more discernment, more feeling that center and feeling that groundedness so that I can show up free from the quote egoic ways of self and protective ways of self and allow myself to be soul led and soul guided, right? So, what would that feel like for you? And maybe even feel into a few areas where you have felt this. I was able to be as I am, to be who I was, to be what I am, and to show up that way? What was in those ingredients in those moments where maybe you even felt like a shadow driver protector coming in to you, trying to puppet you from behind the scenes, and you were like, whoa, wait, pause, hold up. I want to pick a different path. And you were able to go inward, hear that guidance, and then match those actions with that guidance, right? That is that process of self inquiry. This is what we're working on in this process with every single one of these practices. It's based in self inquiry, right? Or contemplation, discernment, sacred witness. So, one of the things that I'm going to be working on this week, and I invite you to join me in practicing this soulful practice this week, is cultivating that connection with that idea of who I am through this idea of be as you are. And the only place I can find my who to be as I am are, sorry, the words get a little tricky when I try to bring it into present time. And words and I have some issues sometimes because of what happened to me when I was 13. Um, and as we bring that into the present moment, because it's not who I was 5 minutes ago. It's not who I'm going to be 5 minutes from now. It's who I am. Be as you are right now. And so I don't know if you've been following the different, but there are breadcrumb trails that lead from quote to quote to quote. And maybe you're starting to see that they build off of each other, right? These pocket teachers pass the baton from one teacher to the next, to the next, to the next. So now that we're open to the present moment and we're willing to be in it now, who do I want to be in that moment? Right? And is the way that I am being in this moment matching the whispers that's coming from my heart and my soul? Helping me either tend to parts of me that are in pain and suffering and loss, parts of me that might be wanting to like act out, parts of me that are trying to do shadow weird exchanges for belonging or for acceptance or pats on my back, from an external standpoint, like how can I start to be aware of these different illusions that get me to show up in a different way than who I truly am, because that self is already in here, right? So, the practice that I have this week for you is that I set the intention to notice when I'm showing up in a way that is out of alignment with my heart and my soul, to be as we are, right? Please guide my attention. This is our good old formula, right? And we're going to set our intention, and then we're going to ask for our attention to be guided to that theme, that little antenna from that pocket teacher throughout the week. And then when we find our attention bubbling that up and we're like, woo, there's I'm showing up not as I am. I'm showing up as a version of me from 5 years ago. How'd she get back into the driver's seat, right? She was amazing. She was brilliant for 5 years ago. I'm going to send her so much love. But she also doesn't match this current time situation that's happening right now, right? She doesn't have the growth, the expansion, the wholeness, the acceptance, and the compassion on board, right? And so when I have those moments and I find that attention piece, I want to pause and then step into flow, right? Allow myself to flow with what new choices want to come forward. The only way we can do that is, like Ramana said, is allowing ourselves to have that ability to have a self dialogue, a self inquiry practice that shifts us from just trying to force our system into a certain way of being to opening up to knowing what it needs to do to release the old way and open to a new one, right? So my attention this week, I would like it to be guided into awareness of the moments when I find myself out of alignment. Acting in ways that match maybe what old versions of me think somebody else might want me to be, or projecting into current time what I think the other person wants, needs, or wishes for me to be. When I'm doubting my inner knowing, I feel that hit. I get that guidance. Say this, do this, don't say this, don't do this. Yes, move towards that, move away from that. When I feel that guidance that comes in Do I doubt it? Do I poke holes in it? And if so, can I pause in that moment and ask myself, hey, what's happening right now? What survival part of me? What old trauma story is up and running? So I also want my attention to be guided to my words. When I'm saying and my thoughts, when I'm thinking in old ways that match a trauma version of me or a survival version of me, or somebody else, like a talking head of like, wow, that's like a third grade peer talking through my head right now, or wow, this was an old boss talking through my head, or an old like family member, or something else that's like a bobblehead talking through me, trying to bring me into a certain viewpoint. I want to know that. I want to catch that so that I can be who I am, right? So when my attention is drawn to that, and all of a sudden I see that quote and I'm like, be as you are, I'm like, ooh, I'm not doing that right now. Something else is driving my bus. Let me pause. First, let me send love and compassion because I know if I'm showing up a way out of alignment with my heart, there's something blocking me. There's an ocean that has cut me off, and I'm running down this road without choice, right? So let me first soften any self judgments that I might have towards myself, any like whacking myself over my head. I have a client who calls it wire brushing. That's brilliant. We want to put all that down, right? And then help my attention flow back to my heart and my soul, asking that question right now, what would help match who I truly be? Who am I? What thoughts, what actions match the real me? And be willing to soften even the labels of what that is, how that would come in, what that would have us defend the flag of self with. Because part of this is allowing ourselves to soften that. Once we've claimed it, once we've allowed ourselves to bring that back in and like honor our brilliance and be like, wow, I'm really good at that. Like, like this is a core part of me. I love this part of me. I honor it and I cherish it. Then we can soften a little bit and we don't have to defend it in a way. We just know that that's a part of us and it is, right? And we can honor that. So we want to help ourselves be able to listen and match our inner guidance without that defending energy coming through, right? Instead, just beautiful, healthy, solid boundaries that honor self and honor the other. So I want to help that listening come in. So let's practice this right now. Take a nice deep breath in, out. And let's do a quick four body check in. And then you can continue this as you go throughout the week. Just check in. How is your body feeling about this? What sensations might be present in or around your body with this idea that this week we're really seeking awareness, that self inquiry, to be as we are, to be as you are, which means we're going to be aware when we're showing up not in that, right? That little antenna is in the back of our field saying, hey, for me, it's like, hey, Michelle, we might want to pause here because we're about ready to show up in a way that's not really in alignment. Hey, that matched the way you used to think. Does that match the new way you think? Or you're about ready to pick up a story and run with it. Can we pause? Something else wants to come in, something new, a new perspective, a new way of being. So how's your body feel about that? Some body parts of you might be like, yes, freedom. Some parts of you might be nervous. Just kind of notice it. Again, you're going to work with this all week if you're following along with the podcast. And so we have plenty of time for these conversations. And then just get a lay of the land of the mental being. Like, what are the different parts, protectors, naysayers, the ones with the questions, concerns, and confusions? We love them. Bring them on. Just kind of write them down. Well, if I'm not this, then who am I? Dot, dot, dot. If I let go of this defending of the flag of me, somebody's going to bawl all over me. Just get down some of the fears, the questions, concerns, confusions that the system might have. I know who I am. I don't need to discover this. I already am this way. You know, we got to be savvy here. And then if it feels good to you, I just invite you to soften, thank the beautiful system for bringing that inquiry forward to you. And then now let's open to the heart. Like, what might the heart be bringing to us?
Maybe there's a little voice in the back of the heart chakra that's saying, like, what if they don't like who I am? That's an acceptance, right? And we know we're talking to a young child part of us. And so it's probably a wounded part of us that we need to honor and love. If there's an angry part that's in there that's like, nobody ever sees who I am, that's still a wounded part that feels overlooked. And so when we drop into our heart space, normally the ones that we start to see are those different, quote, wounded parts of ourselves that haven't been able to be honored or loved, right? And can we give that to them? And we also don't want to self sacrifice ourselves to those old unmet needs. We want to invite them to realize that we can meet those in healthy ways now, right? We don't want to push them to the side, but we also don't want to overindulge them, right? We want to help compassionately hold those parts of us and also step into beautiful action that supports us. And so now, opening up to that soul being, how would it like you to partner with this pocket teacher? Be as you are throughout the week. What is something that it wants to help you bring in? It's perfect just for you. Okay. And so, what I would invite you to do is do a very similar four body check in when you are at the beginning of each day, and then maybe at the ending, kind of the bookend of the day as you're working with this practice. I'm going to be committing to this practice this week and seeing what is coming forward with it. I hope that it is helpful for you too as you work this beautiful pocket teacher for the week. And again, feel free to share your ahas, anything about like what specific teaching maybe like really caught your attention in this episode. Share that in the comments below. Be with you as you are working with you throughout the week and being there. If you want, over on our social media side of Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, I've got little quick graphics so you can have that with you of the Cliff Notes versions of this practice and let it be with you as you go throughout this week. Again, this is Michelle Holling Brooks with Soulful Practices, your pocket teachers for living a courageously connected life, offering you light, love, and joy this week as you work with the pocket teacher. Be as you are. Bye.
Thank you again for joining me in this episode of Soulful Practices. I'm honored to be a guide for you on your spiritual and wellness journey. Your commitment to becoming soul-led within your life is a gift to both yourself and to every being. Together, as we become more aligned with our true self, we truly do create those ripples of light, of love, of joy that goes out to all beings and empowers us all. So please share what parts of this practice spoke to you. Share with us your ahas or how this practice is working with you throughout the week as you go throughout your daily life. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so that you can stay up to date with the next soulful practice and pocket teacher that wants to help you create that courageous connection to your soul-led life. If you feel called to share this podcast with your friends and family or to write a review, please do so because it will help increase that beautiful circle of soul-led companions throughout this world. Together, we can create a beautiful, soulful conversation, connections with others, and help each other on our journey. Like Ram Dass says, we are all just walking each other home. Again, this is your host, Michelle Holling Brooks. Until we meet again in the next Soulful Practice episode, offering you a blessing of light, of love, of joy on your journey.